Start the intro.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Once again, my name's Morgan, and I am going to intro our last official session before our discussion session at 4:10. So we will have 4 presentations today from librarians, and it's going to be covering a range of libraries supporting entrepreneurs and thinkers in the cannabis space. Each presentation is going to last 15 minutes. I've got a couple people helping me out with this today. Our timekeeper, John Weinberg, is going to let the presenters know when they have 2 minutes left. And then our chat manager, Mimi, will dive right into any questions you put in the chat. We have asked the presenters to leave time for questions within their 15 minutes. So we will try to get to as many as we can. We just ask, keep your mics muted, cameras off, and utilize that chat feature. So I'm going to introduce each presentation before we get started. And if you want to see everybody's full bios, I invite you to check out our website. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our first session with Tim Tully, business librarian at San Diego State University, with Seeing Through the Smoke, Finding Companies in the Cannabis Industry. Over to you, Tim.
All right. Hello, all. My name is Tim, as Morgan introduced me. I'm also the assistant head of collections at San Diego State in my presentation, as well as the business librarian. And my presentation is on the specific pain point of doing company and brand research in the cannabis industry, seeing through the smoke. So in this presentation, I'm going to go over what, some of the purposes behind doing company and brand research in this space would be, and then the various sources that I use in this kind of desk research, a lot of it being free web, and free web sources then kind of informing my use of library products and company databases. When you're doing, company or brand research in the cannabis industry, there's a variety of purposes for which you would be doing this kind of research, and that kind of informs what strategies you will employ. One of the big ones is competitive intelligence, So if you're creating a brand or a company, product or service, so you can look at similar companies in that space to look at their pricing, their packaging, product innovations, financial benchmarking, etc. If you are a company that's looking to source, so if you're looking to find, suppliers, let's say I'm a brewery and I like Lagunitas, who creates now a cannabis drink, looking for an extract company to supply the extract for my packaging and bottling of a cannabis drink, you would look for, different suppliers. Also, you would use it for sales lead generation in a B2B capacity if you're a brand or a company looking to sell to dispensaries. Lastly, you'd be looking for another, which kind of, segues a little bit into sourcing, but you could be looking for financial or legal services as well, which is something that is really a big need and pain point for cannabis companies, because they have a lot more stringent regulatory requirements as far as banking, payroll processing, financing, etc. All right, so the first kind of source that I generally use as a starting point when I'm doing this kind of research is I really love using member directories. And there's a number of great ones in the cannabis industry. Some of the big ones are the National Cannabis Industry Association, as well as the National Association of Cannabis Businesses, but different states have their own directories as well. So the pictures on the right show the member directory for the National Cannabis Industry Association, as well as the California Cannabis Industry Association. And you see the drop down, they've got compliance, CBD products, construction and contracting. The member directory for the NCIA is also extremely well enumerated, and that's where you can find various financial and legal service members as well. So if you're looking, for kind of competitors or people you want to source from, these member directories are really great sources. A lot of them are free to use. Some require a membership as librarians and information professionals. This is something we come across all the time when we're doing trade association searches, not open member directories, but depending on the need of the business, it may be worthwhile to recommend an individual purchase of one of these directories. The next kind of source that I use really heavily in doing this company and brand research is exhibitor lists from trade shows. And I've been a huge evangelist of using trade shows and business research. I was trained to be a business librarian by Trip Wyckoff from Florida State University, and he kind of instilled this in me. And there's a really great one for the cannabis industry, the MJ BizCon, which is from the publishers of MJ Biz Daily. The reason why the trade show exhibitor lists are so important is they have custom taxonomies, which are more enumerated and industry specific than you will see using, NAICS or SIC codes or other industry codes like the ICB codes. So I pulled a couple of the product category examples here from the MJ BizCon latest exhibitor list. So they've got design and component development for facilities, extraction equipment. So if you were a extraction company like, Absolute Extracts, and you were looking for new equipment, this would be where you would find, those providers. Testing and lab equipment. So if you're a cultivator and you need, new equipment to make sure you're complying with the regulations or getting, the right THC balances for your, consumers, that this is going to be the place. Even if you don't go to the trade show, you can go to the exhibitor list and find companies that way. And this kind of leads now into what I consider some of the sources that I consider more important for kind of competitive intelligence. And Dashita actually mentioned weed maps in the panel discussion. And for cannabis industry research for, competitive intelligence, that's really one of the big starting points that I've used in these kinds of questions, right? So weed maps is kind of a master directory for dispensaries, and then you can see what dispensaries have on offer. And then you can go to the dispensary sites, get information about the packaging, pricing, ratios, other things that you may want to look at to tweak your product to, be on par or better than what your competitors are doing. This is also useful if you're a dispensary, right? Because then you can see kind of the product and service offerings of the dispensaries and what dispensaries are in the area. And the photo on the bottom left is an example of an Instagram post from March and Ash, which is one of the major dispensaries here in San Diego. And they actually have unionized employees now. I think they're the first cannabis dispensary in California to unionize. But they've got some really excellent examples of promotions, right? So even if you're opening a dispensary in another state, you may want to look at states that have a longer history of the industry so that you can get kind of promotional marketing branding ideas from those dispensaries. And weed maps is a really kind of great jumping off point to either find brands or companies that are kind of on the same product or service offering as you, or if you're a dispensary, to figure out some promotional opportunities that have worked elsewhere. All right, and then the other thing that I also consider myself to be a huge evangelist of news and trade journals, and there's a lot of great ones in the cannabis industry. If you are an academic library or a public library that has Access World News, you can get the Cannabis News Bank from the library vendor News Bank, and they have a lot of really great sources in there. We recently added it here at San Diego State, and it was a pretty nominal fee for us because we already had a subscription to News Bank. If this is not a viable option for your library, I would maybe recommend talking to somebody you know that has this to maybe get an idea of what kind of titles are in there so that you can, look up the free information on those websites. One of the other things that's really interesting about trade journals is they often include buyer's guides. This is another trick that I learned from Trip Wyckoff, who used to run specialissues.com. But I put an example here on the left. High Times has really done excellent buyer's guides over the years in this industry. It's a publication with a long history. They do strains of the year and things like that. So if you're trying to keep up with trends in the industry, these trade journals are excellent. And they'll probably also cover regulatory news and, other things that are of interest to entrepreneurs in this space and their pain points. And I pulled a couple examples down here at the bottom of things that I've seen as far as interesting trade journals. So there's Marijuana Today, Daily, Marijuana Venture, the Cannabis Reporter, Cannabis Business Executive. These are all things I would recommend looking into. Also, government sites and regulatory bodies are going to have company information depending on the state. The example I pulled on the right here is from the Office of Medical Marijuana Use in Florida. And I was looking up dispensaries in Florida, actually because my mom was interested in trying to start a cannabis dispensary in Florida. And the NCIA, the National Cannabis Industry Association state policy map, is a great starting point for finding, local regulatory bodies, and doing some Google advanced searches with, site::gov and PDF file types. You may be able to find some of these reports, newsletters, things of that nature. But Florida is a vertically integrated state to where the dispensaries have to also be the cultivators. So they've got very detailed information on the amount of THC that is sold through all of the dispensaries in the state, right? And this is going to vary state to state, like Dr. Michelle Scott said in her keynote, but really these kind of newsletters, listservs, like the panel had discussed from the local regulatory bodies, are going to be crucial, right? You're going to be able to find a lot of information about companies, their licensures, maybe even some sales quantity data through these government sites and regulatory bodies. One of the things I've also found useful, because a lot of this falls under desk research, kind of complicated free web research. When I was at the Sociable conference last year, I think that was the last in-person conference, Summer Kristevska from Wake Forest showed me this great tool, which is a web plugin called SimilarWeb, where if you download the free version, you can get some competitor links, so you can see based on SEO or like keyword web or keyword scraping, what websites may be similar to the one that you're looking at. So if you've identified a competitor, this can be, or a company you're trying to source from, this could be a way to find other similar companies and brands. I used Steezy as an example, which is a large cannabis product company, and these are some of the other companies' websites that came up from the SimilarWeb plugin. There's obviously a paid for version, but the free version is something that I use all the time in my competitive research. Lastly, then you can take all of this information once you get your lists of companies that you want to look at, and then we can use the tools that librarians are more accustomed to using. Some of the databases that I have listed on the left, Reference Solutions, which used to be Reference USA, Privco, who's a sponsor of this event. And these tools are going to be really useful for financial benchmarking, seeing revenue, potential business expenditures, contact information if you're using this for CRM population. If you're looking for potential financial backing, you can see what VCs and PEIs have funded different companies that are seen as similar companies to you, what the valuation looked like, employee counts, etc. One thing for financial benchmarking, looking at Canadian companies may be interesting, because a classic approach is looking at public company filings, because they're more enumerated and they have more stringent reporting requirements. And something like Mergent Online or Mergent Intellect can be used to find some of these. If you're looking at the Canadian companies in particular to look at, public company filings, I've found that the ICB code listed here for marijuana producers has been the most effective. But you can also use known companies to search, these databases. The reason why I put this last is I think the desk research with the free web is important first, especially if you're looking at brands opposed to companies, because you need to figure out what the official company name of the brand is before searching it. Kana Edibles, for example, is actually Sunderstorm Inc. So if you were searching for Kana in the DMB private company database or in Reference USA, you wouldn't find it. So you need to do that kind of free web research first, and then come back to the tools that we have traditionally known and loved to do this kind of research. But that's kind of the mix that I look at when I'm doing research in this industry.
Perfect. Thank you, Tim. And no questions came in, but everyone is just totally blown away by all your information. And we all love Trip too. So that was a good shout out for him. So next up, we're going to have Jay. So Jay, if you want to go ahead and pull up your slides, if you have them.
Thank you. I don't have any slides today. I'm just going to talk. So
I love it. Okay. All right. Well, let me introduce you then, Jay. So this is Jay Lyman. He's a librarian at Seattle Public Library. Today, Jay's going to be talking about community listening and how public libraries may help. And Jay, you've got until, I know you're not on Eastern Standard Time, but 3:38 will put you up to 2 minutes till questions.
All right. Well, thanks. And help me stay on track there if I start to go over.
Will do, Jay. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I just have to start off by saying, this is just so amazing to hear from all of you. And I feel like I'm learning from people who are more expert than I am. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to really where I can add value is really just sharing from my experience, where some of these things that have already been covered, how I've been hearing about those in my community. So just stepping back in time to 2012, some of my first, professional experience around working in the cannabis space really goes pre-legalization in Washington State. In 2012, the Seattle Public Library was engaged with a program with the University of Washington called the Living Voters Guide. And so what we were doing was that there was a small group of librarians who were focused on really fact-checking this moderated forum around the initiatives that were coming out. And one of those initiatives was Initiative 502, which was the legalization of marijuana in Washington State. And so I kind of got up to speed as this was happening, and from that project, and that was really interesting and fascinating and challenging and things for me and my team that were working on that. But I was so glad that we did, because it really helped us that very first week, and actually before that too, when we started getting questions from folks in the community who were going to go out and start these businesses after it passed. And indeed, that very first week, there were questions about merchandising design. So I was, super excited to hear about Jason's experiences with earlier in this conversation too. There were details. It was just exciting to see this industry emerge, and align itself with that there were suddenly more industry publications coming out, and we were looking at those, and we were all trying to figure out where can we find information and things there too. So that challenge of trying to find information when when it hasn't been collected yet, was certainly something that we were trying to do at that time, and continue to do, honestly, too, where there definitely is more data sources, which, you know, Tim's, I'm glad I didn't put together a presentation about data sources, because Tim just blew it out of the water right there, in my opinion. Wish I had had that back in that time. I guess, you know, what I want to also share is, you know, perspectives from, you know, our community listening. And, you know, and one of the best and most important ways that we as librarians can do that community listening, you know, one being at the, you know, no-brainer, like business forums, going to the chamber events, all those kind of things, but really like reference work, you know, and working one-on-one with entrepreneurs in a, you know, with a public library. That's where we can actually learn the most about what our folks' needs are, because they're going to be more honest. That, you know, it's much more nuanced in things like this too. So some of the things that I'm hearing in those conversations with entrepreneurs around cannabis and around other things too. You know, one concept that I want to highlight that I was so happy to hear Hillary and Tamika talk about was, you know, criminalization of marijuana, you know, has definitely disproportionately harmed, you know, BIPOC communities. And, you know, I hear stories from folks who are, you know, through this period, who, you know, are, you know, in their community, you know, members of their family and, you know, uncles and fathers, you know, have been arrested for this kind of activity. And then someone from outside that community, after legalization, has the resources and the opportunity to open up a business there in their own community, you know, to doing that same activity, but, you know, and they're doing it legally, where, you know, others in their family have been, you know, arrested for this activity. So, you know, being aware of that history of and the trauma that has happened, I think is really important here. And I reflect on that and think about that in my work and in supporting these entrepreneurs. How can we remove those barriers and help those from the community benefit from this, not someone from outside the community, you know? And there's a lot of subtle ways we can do that. Like, and you know, we have to also think about being a public institution. You know, I'm a public library. I'm going to serve everyone, anyone that comes to me, and help everyone. But I also want to, you know, and we prioritize audiences in our work. And how can we do that? You know, we can, marketing is a big piece that we can work with there. Working with others and highlighting voices of community members. And getting outside of the library and doing outreach to communities where people are. That's super important to being effective in that way. And thinking about those particular barriers that particular communities might have around language or around you know, how business works, those kinds of things. Those are definitely things that myself and my colleague are thinking about as we work to think about equity in our work. Yeah, and you know, when I think about, and partnerships too, like aligning ourselves with local business organizations in those communities who have aligned values around those efforts. One example too that I think really hasn't been touched on as much today is supporting the nonprofits which are working to make change in this space. So, you know, there definitely are nonprofits that I'm talking to that are working on making change and putting forth legislation and addressing the traumas that have happened to communities and community members. And, you know, in my work, you know, with we certainly talk about like that work happening and supporting for-profits, but some of the folks that we're working with are nonprofits. And so there we're supporting them with access to Foundation Directory and to other local nonprofit assistance organizations, or for both the for-profit and nonprofit companies or, you know, organizations providing legal assistance. You know, so that's something that we've been doing, particularly during the pandemic, is offering offering to the public access to attorneys who have a specialization in corporate law or intellectual property law. And those have been super popular, and for both the cannabis entrepreneurs and the nonprofits supporting that, and then also other kinds of businesses too. So that's another element of the work there too. I also want to kind of highlight the something that was said earlier too, which is like the general public education, and that's something that we definitely have touched on too, is around normalization and networking in some of our programs for older adults, and what cannabis is, how it helps. You sort of helping people think about that from a health perspective, and so those have been popular and interesting. Although that's not my work, my amazing colleagues have been working on that. I also want to talk about a little bit about some of that, that custom assistance. I think, and also like particular community outreach that we've been doing in communities here in Seattle and beyond. One of my favorite programs and activities right now is the Black-owned Business Excellence Group, which has been meeting since we worked together to develop some programs in February. And so through that work, we are kind of reaching out to particular communities within our city and within the state that are helping. And so it's really aligning ourselves with other, like the SBDC, the local SBDC is all part of that work. The SBA has just been helping, a number of others. And I think where that can really help, and is where it becomes pertinent to this topic, is that, whatever the industry that folks are going into, having someone who presents, who's a member of the community, who has that trust and providing that kind of an assistance, I think that's a really important element. Let's see.
Jay,
yeah.
we got 2 minutes left, and I want to bring up a topic that I see Steve has asked about, and that I'm actually, my own curiosity was picked. So I'm the business and nonprofit librarian. So I totally agree. I think looking at nonprofits in this space and nonprofit librarianship in general might be under discussed when we talk about business librarianship. So I'm wondering, how involved were nonprofits in your community from the legalization aspect, and how can you dig in a little bit more about how you interact with them around this topic?
Well, I'll be honest, like at that early stage, I'm not sure, because we at that point we weren't engaging with them in that way. But now, yes, things have changed, but they also haven't changed. We still have a federal, there's still, so we're still working through this. There's still, and even should marijuana be legalized across our nation, those traumas and those things that history, that's not going away. That's still we're going to live with that. And so thinking of ways that the library might help with that, and supporting those nonprofits in that work as well, and addressing those harms that communities have had in different ways. And some of those nonprofits, I'll just to share kind of like the how it is, certainly like working with them around brand, around like them nonprofits around their own branding, helping them make connections within the community, helping the for-profit who has that same value and is doing work that's aligned with the nonprofit, helping them understand how to get fiscal sponsorship, like what that is, how that works, helping them find a fiscal sponsor and navigate to where all those partners that are playing in that same space might be. So those are some examples there. Great question. Thank you.
Perfect. So we are right at 3:40. So any more questions? Jay, will you be sticking around for our discussion hour at 4:10? Okay. So
Absolutely.
if anyone has questions for Jay, you can find his info on the ELC website, but he'll be sticking around. So next, I want to move on to our third group of speakers, and we do have a group. So I'm going to invite Abigail, Mariana, Sarah, and Stephanie to go ahead and hopefully they can share their screen. Okay. Hey, there we go. So I will briefly introduce this group. So we have Abigail Warnock, Mariana Jardin, Sarah Shuja, Stephanie Pepper. Sorry if I butchered any names, from the Bridge, University of Toronto Scarborough Library, UTSC, with high expectations supporting an academic cannabis conference on a dime. Over to y'all.
Hello, everyone. So I'd like to welcome you all today and thank you so much for the opportunity to present. So today my colleagues and I will be telling you about how we successfully supported a medical cannabis conference and competition during what's been a very challenging year. So just a quick rundown of the agenda for today's presentation. We'll just do quick introductions and a welcome to the Bridge, which is the library that we work out of. We'll talk about bridging industry and then researchers, discussing research support at the conference itself and research instruction for the industry competition component of the conference, and how to foster a nimble and responsive team culture. So quick introductions. The speakers today are my colleague Mariana Jardin, who is the liaison librarian for management co-op, arts and science co-op, and computer and mathematical sciences. My colleague Sarah Shuja, who's the liaison librarian for entrepreneurship and human geography. Stephanie Perpick, who's the business librarian and the coordinator of the Bridge. And myself, Abigail Warnock. I'm the library technician at the Bridge, and I'm also currently pursuing my Master's of Information at University of Toronto. So what is the Bridge? The Bridge is the University of Toronto Scarborough's Business Library, Innovation Center, Campus-linked Accelerator, and Data Lab. So we are a joint venture between the UTSC Library and the UTSC Department of Management. And our mission is to provide outstanding experiential learning opportunities to students, focusing on the areas of business, research, and innovation. So a little bit about the conference. So the context of our research supporting, I'm just going to give some context rather around our research support for the first UTSC Medical Cannabis Conference. So as we've seen, there's a dearth of research data on medical and recreational cannabis industries, and connections between industries and researchers are starting to grow. So hosting this conference was an opportunity for UTSC management to sort of foster those relationships with industry and research so that the university could support the so that the university could support the advancement of the cannabis industry. So University of Toronto has created an interdisciplinary research consortium called the Toronto C3 to support research in the sciences. And this conference was bringing a management and business lens specifically. So the conference had two components. There was a full day virtual conference run through a platform called Whova, and there were about 50 attendees. And there was also a week-long industry-led competition for students with a case study and presentation, and we supported both events. So supporting the conference. So we supported the conference in the design stage and also on the day of. So in collaboration with the conference team, we recreated sort of the networking experience that you would have in an in-person conference by creating virtual chat rooms on that online platform. And we hosted an Ask a Librarian type of space where we encouraged conference attendees to ask us for assistance with research topics. And so we developed a strategy for how to support internal conference attendees and external users around sort of licensing restrictions. And we received a number of really interesting questions in that Ask a Librarian space, and the feedback for providing that service in the conference was really excellent. So we also created a research roundup where we shared the latest industry research and encouraged users to share their published papers. And it resulted in a space that was really rich in information that was suitable for both internal and our external audiences. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Sarah, now.
Thanks, Abby. So another way we supported the conference is through research instruction for the actual cannabis competition, in which we used a scaffolded approach that used both asynchronous and synchronous instruction. So considering that the aim of the conference was to bridge academia and business in order to create new synergistic linkages to accelerate knowledge, development, and mobilization in this domain, we used a theoretical approach to our instruction that is based on entrepreneurship research and insights. So back in the fall at EntreLib conference, I presented with my other colleagues, Carrie Tone and Holly Inglis, about aligning business literacy with startup thinking. So one of our insights about entrepreneurs is that the focus on traditional industry classifications don't always apply to startups. So startups are often in new and emerging markets that aren't always covered by NAICS or one NAICS alone. And segmentation often excludes technology platforms. So our approach to this insight in the workshop is that we focus on data points and industry reports instead of teaching to the classification systems. And we also introduce concepts of segmentation to help interpret the data in relevant ways. So when we think of the conference, it brings together medicine and business with the cannabis industry, along with the use of technology. So bridging the traditional with technology and emerging startup trends. So that's where something like CB Insights, for example, can be helpful for market segmentation that bridges the technology with this budding industry, #pun. So in terms of the ALA-RUSA business research competencies guidelines, this really relates to the research strategies and techniques where we're analyzing and parsing out the industry while identifying data sources. So our first approach was to provide asynchronous modules for the competition participants prior to the virtual synchronous sessions with Mariana. These asynchronous modules are located in the Bridges New Venture Program Librarian Guide, and they engage participants in 2 activities. The first activity we asked them to engage in is called Innovation Generator by Game Storming, in which teams identify and address their customer needs using a table that you see on the side in the image that looks at customer problems, invention value, and how they might innovate based on these ideas. In the second activity, we had participants consider what do they need to know about the cannabis market, whether it's the industry, customer, or competitors. They then think of all the various questions they might have about these different aspects and the needs, and how these are best answered. So are these best answered by primary research or secondary research? They then were able to use the aspects that were related to secondary research to explore later in the synchronous workshop with Mariana. And I just want to note that this activity is developed by Helen Kula, who's a business librarian at the Mississauga campus at U of T. So we're a very collaborative bunch. And I'll pass it on to Mariana.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. So I'm going to stay now on the topic of instruction, and I'm going to talk about how we created modular community-oriented learning for the case competition portion of the conference. So I leveraged the existing content that Sarah just described, as well as an introduction to industry research for startups workshop that was already on the books, which was also taught by Sarah. And these were supports that were already in place that I could build on, but they were not tailored to medical cannabis research. So I designed and delivered a workshop for this topic. And the purpose of the workshop was to help conference participants answer the case competition question, which was what ethical and regulatory considerations must be made as companies break into cannabis as an emerging global market. So my task was to make sure that the goals for the session were suitable and that whatever I delivered could then be packaged up as a module from which the conference community or the attendees could also benefit from in a video recording format. And this entailed creating asynchronous content and also converting my synchronous workshop into an accessible learning object in our institutional learning management system. In the session itself, I took attendees right to where the information was located, just based on the fact that we had very little time together. So it was less focused on like sort of how to, but rather, like, here's where it is. And I think that's just something that we had to deal with based on the time that was available. But some of the resources that I showed them were Ibis World, focusing on the pandemic impacts on the industry, forecasting, regulatory info, CB Insights for the regional context and for topical reports, Crunchbase for financials and the key developments, ProQuest broadly for academic research into ethical and legal considerations, and a LibGuide was also created to accompany the instruction. And now what I really want to highlight is that from a pedagogical perspective, we really wanted to create a community of inquiry within our support model. As Abby mentioned, we had a conference platform, and there our participants could really be socially present with each other and leverage each other's knowledge through discussion. And by being embedded ourselves in the conference platform, we really sought to establish and promote cognitive presence so participants could co-construct meaning through collaboration. And the teaching presence came through the leveraging of the interactive resources and the workshop facilitation for the purpose of providing a really meaningful learning experience for our attendees. And now I'll pass it on to Stephanie, who's going to talk about how we worked as a team to deliver on this request.
Yeah, so I guess we're just kind of changing gears now a little bit from the what of how we supported this conference to the how. And this is really about the team. And as you can imagine, this team is amazing and so responsive during such a challenging year. But we're part of two different cultures. We're part of the University of Toronto Scarborough Library and the business program at Scarborough, the Department of Management. And I find both of these work cultures are extremely supportive and have led us to be able to do things like this when we don't have much of a turnaround time. Because from the first day that we were asked to deliver on this to the end was just a matter of weeks. And so, weeks and days as opposed to months and weeks. So how do we do that? How do we get our teams to be able to do that? So there's just a couple points around, I guess, the organizational behavior side of it. So the first thing is really just to rally around our shared values, which are, in this case, really supporting our students, our faculty members who are trying to do this research, and our industry partners and community members who are, trying to do all of this work. And it's really around supporting them. So when it comes time to prioritizing things, being flexible to know how to prioritize and drop certain things so that we can react to this is important. The next piece is around trusting your team. So obviously everybody in this team are experts, and the best thing that I can do as the coordinator is to step back and let them do their thing and help them to remove any roadblocks that might be in the way. The next one is about internal communications. And so when I say internal communications, I mean with the goal of anytime there's an issue or a problem that we're openly talking about it, so that little things that, try to have a rule. If you're annoyed by something for longer than 15 minutes, like it's something that we need to talk about. So constantly bringing that into our team culture. And then celebrating our successes and wins. So a win for one is a win for all. And it's all about supporting our students and faculty. And we do this together. And and today's a great example. We're celebrating and we're all here together doing that work, right? So just wanted to share that as part of the how. But yeah, I think that brings us to the end of the presentation. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here, and we welcome any questions that you may have.
Y'all, I'm so impressed by you. When I saw that there were 4 of you, I'm like, how are they doing it in 15 minutes? And that was just beautifully seamless. So it was like living proof of your teamwork. So that's so great. And that 15-minute rule,
team.
It really is like, oh my God. And I'm using that 15-minute rule. I'm totally stealing it. So that's really great. We see a lot of no questions that I see just yet.
I think you covered it very well. I think there are people that are still in shock.
Yeah, it was so good.
How did they do that?
So insightful and so many great lessons, lessons that we can use for future conferences like this too. So thank you all so much. All right, so I'm going to invite last but certainly not least, Mark Pond to the table here. Mark, you should be a co-host if you have slides, if you would like to. There we go.
Yeah,
Mark.
no slides.
No slides.
For me,
I love
but,
this. Wow. Okay. All right. Well, Mark, let me give you a super brief intro then. So Mark Pond is the librarian at Spokane Public Library and definitely a friend of the EntreLib conference. And today we'll be talking jackpot, getting out of the weeds, hashtag pun, when researching the cannabis industry. So over to you, Mark.
All right. Well, thank you, Morgan. So I do have a screen share here, but just no slides. So I'll pop over here. All right, so quick bit of background about me. So I've been the business research librarian, also nonprofit librarian, like Jay mentioned, here in Spokane since 2006. But I'd say about 2012 or so, things really kind of started to gel with the Spokane Public Library's set of business resources. And wanted to just quickly run through a couple of the approaches and tools and resources and just kind of thoughts about this particular industry, and also, you know, kind of the history of where it's been. That it's already been alluded to many times here today, so I won't go too deep into that. But a couple of things that I really wanted to call out first. Just about 2 months ago, the Spokane Public Library, we teamed up with our local EDA and also our Chamber of Commerce. That's GSI, Greater Spokane Incorporated. And I teamed up with them to co-manage this Startup Spokane program. And Startup Spokane, it's been up and running since 2015, 2016 or so. But basically what Startup Spokane is shooting to do is just be the kind of front door for all entrepreneurial activity around town. So we're just trying to make it super streamlined and super smooth for entrepreneurs to come knock on one door. And then my job is to work with those entrepreneurs coming in to get them connected with resources around town. So make sure that they know about SCORE and SPDC and various universities offering support. So pretty much any organization that's here in the area that's offering support for our local businesses, that includes our kind of surrounding libraries around the region. So that's my job, is kind of pulling together that network and trying to place our entrepreneurs right at the center of that, and make sure that they know that the resources exist. And then once that step's accomplished, then make some warm referrals and handoffs to make sure that they're getting where they need to go. So that's one thing that I'm super excited about. And yeah, it's working out pretty well. Kind of the corollary to that similar program, but there's an organization called SIMBA, which doesn't really roll off the tongue, but it's called, that stands for Spokane Independent Metro Business Association. And it's it's somewhat designed to be a counterweight to GSI, whereas GSI is more kind of our well-established industries, businesses that have been in town for decades, and they've got a firm footing here, whereas this Live Local in the Northwest, the INW, that's what that stands for. We're trying to be kind of the local mom and pop chamber of commerce. And I sit on the board of this particular organization, but what we've tried to do is really make sure that our local businesses know who their other local businesses are. And then we're also trying to pull together some consumer education, because a local economy, it doesn't really fly so well if you don't have consumers who are buying in and saying, yes, I'm willing to shop locally. So the website, it's not the swankiest thing out there, but just to kind of give you a quick sense of what it looks like. And somewhere in here, I know that there's a CBD product. Yeah, it's not bubbling to the top immediately, but just know that pulling together this type of kind of local commerce marketplace, I think, is a fabulous idea for libraries to insert themselves. And if we can team that up kind of with that Startup Spokane type of program, where the library is really centrally located and folks coming through are really aware of what we have to offer, that's a win for us. And also it makes it so that we can be the connectors. I was working, this was a couple years ago now, but there was a cannabis grower who was interested in starting up a greenhouse operation. I was working with him on some business plan stuff, but as it turns out, there was another person that I'd been working with maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks prior to that. And he's an architect here in town, but he was getting pretty deep into the world of designing grow greenhouses. That was what he was focusing on. That became kind of his area of specialty. So for me to be able to make that connection and say, hey, Sandra, you need to talk to Alex, and be able to be the one brokering those connections, it's a huge win for our libraries. All right, diving in here, a couple of things. Jade alluded to this in terms of Washington State's history with cannabis and legalization. It officially became legalized, I think it is in 2012, late fall of 2012. And at the time, that was a really rough time to do any market research around the cannabis industry. It's tough to get good numbers if you're asking people to divulge information that may land them in jail if they give honest answers. So we've come a long way, and I think that we've got definitely some tools and resources that can really help move things in the right direction for folks. A number of these resources here on the SpokaneBusiness.org page, this is where I have all of our business research tools listed out here. But a couple of things that are worth calling out just right off the top. The Ibis World reports, those are awesome. I've got a quick sample here of just what that looks like if no one's bumped into these before, but usually what we get with Ibis World are 30 to 40 page, maybe 50 page market research reports on what's going on in that particular industry. And a couple of things that are really worth diving into, and we won't run through all the tabs because we'd be here all day, but just know that if we dig in here to, say, under the products and markets tab, then we can tend to get pretty good information that kind of mirrors what Mintel was offering in terms of some market research in terms of age breakdown and being able to do some demographic research. So those kind of third-party industry research reports, doesn't look like this is loading right now for some reason. Those are great, but I would say especially for states that are just coming online and just starting to look at legalizing things, I would turn pretty heavily to looking at what previous states, say, here's Washington State's Liquor and Cannabis Control Board, their webpage. They've got some really good data to be able to start to sift through. And, it'll be obviously focused on Washington State, but being able to get in and see, okay, wow, all right, what are the sales volumes by county? And we can even break it down by the month, but also we can get in and see, let's see here, in terms of kind of that competitive analysis piece, there's the list of several hundred different cannabis businesses scattered around Washington State. And you've got business license, the UBI numbers, you've got the trade name, you've got a lot of information here to be able to play around with. And being able to couple that data with sales volume data so you can get some pretty good averages of, okay, what's an average retailer here in Spokane County? What are the revenue numbers looking like for that particular region of the state? So I know that it's not necessarily applicable across the nation, but still, it can give you some pretty good numbers to work with within a certain range. All right, Ibis, what have we just looked at? Another place in terms of finding good data. Again, I think Mintel would be just fabulous. I'm going to do a deep dive to see if I can figure out how to line up a subscription here for my library. But other places to turn would be just well-respected polling types of firms. So this is data from Gallup polling, and assuming that your local market doesn't vary too widely from some of these industry and national averages that they put together, this can be really helpful for those business planning types of purposes, to be able to say, okay, 15% of men are saying that they smoke marijuana, but it's really those 18 to 29-year-olds. 22% of them are saying that, yes, smoke marijuana. To be able to then take data points like that and jump over to a resource like Demographics Now. Here within Demographics Now, it covers the entire US, but you can set up your local region however you want. I'm just looking here at Spokane County right now. And once you have your region set up, you've got dozens of reports that you can run. But this one in particular is just looking at age breakdown by sex within Spokane County. So we can come in and see, all right, total males in that 20 to 24-year-old range. We've got 7% of our population falls into that age range for males. And let's see here, we've got total population of 527, almost 528,000. So I'm a liberal arts major, so I can't do the math right off the top of my head, but take that 7% of the 527, you take the 22% of the data point that Gallup pulled together to say, all right, these are folks that are saying that they're smoking. And you can get some pretty good market size estimates coming at it that way. Another thing that you can do with Demographics Now is that you can map all of this data. So if you wanted to figure out, all right, where in Spokane are those 20 to 24-year-olds concentrated? And this is getting us down to the census block level, but to know that, okay, yeah, they're not in this little sliver of land right there, but there's a really nice pocket right over there. We can map where the retail locations are for marijuana stores, kind of overlay that with this map. And sometimes you might be able to really find some really good site location types of answers to site location questions. Really helpful for trying to put together some marketing plans of where you spend your time and energy and effort trying to reach particular populations. So Demographics Now, it's definitely one of my workhorses. And then the last one, and a couple of people have already called this out, but I just wanted to give you a quick run by here in case you haven't bumped into PitchBook. It's a fabulous tool for this type of research, and it's been mentioned several times today that forming connections and just building out a network of folks that you can go talk to is really valuable. So what I did here, I pulled together a list, just ran a search for investors in the cannabis industry that have put together that are based here on the West Coast. So we've got 498 funders of various stripes that we can run through here to be able to see, okay, well, who is investing in this particular industry? So being able to get to that level of data and being able to just scroll across and see that, okay, BAM Ventures, whoever they are, they've made one investment in the weed marijuana industry. They've got a total of 4 professionals. They've made 16 investments overall, but to be able to just click in on any of these and see, all right, I have no idea who these folks are. It's always dangerous to do live searches without running through it beforehand, but to be able to say, okay, this particular funder, here's the company that they founded or that they funded in the past, and you can then get in to see, all right, they gave them $2.4 million, 2.45, and just down to a crazy level of detail. So for these types of questions where we're trying to pull together resources to support our entrepreneurs, trying to connect them with money, connect them with resources, our libraries, we've got, I'd say, the best platform out there for sharing this type of data that's really valuable. It's really expensive. It's really hard to come by. Every one of our marijuana entrepreneurs needs access to it, but it makes zero sense for any one of them to try to go out and round it up on their own. So that's where the library steps in and makes that happen. All right, I think that I'm probably close to.
Yeah, that was perfect. You got 1 minute.
All right.
So in 1 minute, one question we did have come through, and there's been some great chat around it already, and I think our resource guide will be helpful. But somebody did ask, any other market research resources for public libraries that aren't from Ibis, World, or Mintel? And just like, is there one, we really only have time for one, but is there like one really kind of more open access resource that comes to mind, Mark, for you?
Yeah, I think I saw this in that Google Doc. Somebody already posted it there, but the first research industry profile reports, those are included within ProQuest, or at least within our ProQuest package. So that's a little bit more of an accessible and easier to get to and more common resource out there. Yeah, Tim did a great job of covering some of the industry publications. Those are great tools, great resources. And again, I lean pretty heavily, bounce around on the websites of states that have legalized marijuana for a couple of years now, and be able to dig in to see what type of data they're releasing publicly.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark, Tim, Jay, Abigail, Mariana, Sarah, Stephanie. My goodness, we've just had so much awesome knowledge shared. Thanks. I made a comment to one of my co-chairs. This was like Librarian Olympic, like Librarian Presentation Olympics, and you all get gold medals. So great job, everybody. So we are actually going to transition now to our moderated discussion. So if we want to go ahead, and we're going to shut off the recording so it's a safer space for all of us to discuss the